So I'm very happy to be here. When Patrick McNeil asked me to come and speak, I was like, I don't know. And he said, the theme is dumpster fire. And I said, I think I can work with that. I can work with that. So the title of my talk is Security is Already Here, it's just unevenly distributed. And I get asked a lot about, are we getting better? Are we getting better at security? You've been doing this for 20 years. Are we getting better? And I'm like, yes and no, right? There are some places where it's better, and there's a lot of places where it's not better than it was in the 90s. So it's both, right? It's better and worse. There are places that you can build something securely or rely on something, and there's a lot of places where you can't rely on whatever the vendors or the companies you're dealing with are. So that's how I started to think about it. It's unevenly distributed. And the quote is kind of a take off of, if anyone's a William Gibson fan, I read Neuromancer, in my early 20s, and it was kind of a seminal book for me. He was the seminal cyberpunk writer, and I follow him on Twitter, and one of his famous quotes is, "The future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed," which, that's pretty deep, right? When you think about that, it has to start somewhere and spread. And I thought, well, if security is somewhere, maybe we can hopefully get it to spread. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. Just going to start off with this picture because I think it's so fun. And if you don't know which one is in that Senate hearing room, that's me right there. With the long hair. If you notice, they let us testify with our hacker names. See, it says Weld Pond there, and Space Rogue, and Mudge, Kingpin, Brian Oblivion, and Senator Thompson, who I think was from Tennessee, was the chairman of the committee at the time, and he told a story in the press the next day where his son asked him, did you do anything interesting today, Dad? And he said, yeah, I had a hearing and I was questioning a guy called Space Rogue. So I think the senators kind of enjoyed it too. But the fact that they let us testify with our hacker handles was sort of like giving us some respect for what we were doing. They basically said, we know you guys have day jobs, and poking holes at companies like Microsoft could put your job at risk, right? It's crazy that sometimes that even happens today, but back in the 90s, that happened all the time, right? Vendors would pressure companies, say, hey, we're not going to do business with you if you are making us look bad, because that's what disclosure was back before today, where it's much more accepted. But the thing that really we did at the Loft in the 90s was the concept of adversarial testing, which vendors didn't understand, companies didn't understand. They put their technology out there, and they thought it was secure because they had authentication and authorization and logging and all the things that all the compliance people said that they had to do to have a secure piece of software. But of course, it was riddled with buffer overflows and just stupid logic errors, right? I found a vulnerability in Windows in the late 90s, where, I don't know if you remember back then, but you could, if you weren't connected to a domain, you could have local user accounts on your machine, and you could have file shares like that, and there was actually a different authentication path it went through. And the way that they checked to see if your password was correct to connect to the share was to do a string compare, and when they did the string compare, they used the length of the string that you sent them. So all you had to do if it was an alphanumeric password, all you had to do was cycle through single letters, A, B, C, D, and it would just compare the first letter that you sent to the first letter in the password that was the password stored on the system. So stupid stuff like that. I think that qualifies as a dumpster fire, right? We should have something that happens when someone says dumpster fire. But this was sort of, we were figuring out this way of using hacker techniques of reverse engineering, fuzzing, and just trying to do things that break the assumptions that the programmers had to find vulnerabilities. The beginning sort of vulnerability research, and that got noticed by Microsoft, and they actually wanted to have a meeting with us and said, how are you doing this stuff, like breaking our SMB protocol? Like, how do you do that? And we're like, hey, we set up, 2 machines, and we sniff the network, and we look at the packets, and we try to figure out how it's working, and then we set up like a Linux machine to send, the right request that we think is going to log us in or let us take over a connection. And they're like, what's this Linux thing? Like they did all their testing on Windows boxes where the stack, the network stack, always like took control and wouldn't let them actually really test their software. So they're like, that's interesting. You actually look at the packets on the wire with another operating system. So we kind of started to teach them to do that. And this article here in EE Times, where I'm back in the left there with the sunglasses. See, I cut my hair. Where is this here? See, I cut my hair. Mudge didn't cut his hair, but that came later. This guy, Larry Lange, wanted to hear about, Microsoft's meeting with you. Why is Microsoft meeting with hackers? And we're just kind of opening their eyes to you're not really doing any security testing. You're just not. You think you are. And then a few years later, the Loft, which I have bittersweet thoughts about, joined At Stake, and we helped start this security consulting company with the whole concept of using good hackers to battle bad hackers. And the idea was, we would sell our services, and we would do code reviews, we would fuzz, we would do manual pen testing on applications so that vendors could ship secure applications. And I worked on several applications for Microsoft at the time. And so there was this period where people were not doing security at all, and people actually started to do things sort of in the early 2000s. And I did that for about 4 years. And it was all manual. There were no tools to do this. And then in 2006, me and Dildog, Christian Ryu, founded Veracode. And the idea there was there's just not enough security experts to go around. There's just too many developers writing too many applications. There weren't enough people. Let's just try to automate all the things that we could automate. So that's where we came up with binary static analysis to basically automate code review. We came up with web scanning to scan applications and other tools that would just really help developers secure the software that they were building. So now I want to talk about where we are now. Like what are the problems? And when we testified before the Senate in '98, we famously said, and this was the soundbite that everyone latched onto. We didn't really know about soundbites back then, but we got a lesson was we can take down the internet in 30 minutes. Is what we said. And everyone was like, whoa, you can take down the internet in 30 minutes. And we didn't really want to say exactly how to do it. But we said, we're gonna tell the people that could potentially fix this how to do it. And what we were talking about was the BGP protocol. So the Border Gateway Protocol is how different networks route traffic between each other, right? And this is how the different routers talk to each other between different network systems, and that's actually what kind of makes an internetwork, right? And it's totally unauthenticated. Some people would have filters that said, I'm only going to take BGP protocol over this port from these IP addresses, but a lot of places didn't have those filters because they had to manage that, and it slowed things down, and it was just sort of wide open. So you could just spoof BGP packets and tell a router that, hey, route your traffic through there. Well, what if you tell all the routers to route all their traffic through one place? That's not going to work, right? And those were the things that we were talking about. So that was back in '98. Guess what? They didn't fix it. They came up with secure BGP. Actually, it was fixed by IETF. There's a secure BGP protocol, but no one implemented it, right? Everyone would sort of have to implement it, and no one implemented it. Because if you're backwards compatible, what's the point, right? So everyone would have to go to secure BGP, and 20 years later, no one has done it, right? So even though the solution exists, no one has done that. And if you look up here, this is a tweet I follow this BGP stream because I'm into the BGP protocol. And what they do is whenever there's sort of an anomaly in BGP in new routes that are published, they tweet about it. And you can see here that it's U.S. Department of Energy's network is being routed through China Telecom. That's probably not the best route, right? That's probably not the best route. This still happens today. And there was an interesting attack. It's not common that people use it for attacks. This is probably just to sniff traffic, right? But there was an attack using this in 2018 on My Ether Wallet. So My Ether Wallet is a place where you can store your Ethereum, right? And you can go to their website and you can do transactions with your account. Well, they were using Route 53, which is a DNS service by Amazon. Someone did a BGP attack on Route 53. So this is a BGP attack on Amazon, right? You think they would know what they're doing, but you can't. It's really hard to control this. They routed all the Route 53 DNS traffic through their DNS server, where they were publishing a new IP address for My Ether Wallet. So all the traffic went to a different website. They even registered a certificate for that website, because once they had control of the traffic, they're like, hey, this is my email, this is my domain, I want to register a certificate. So it even showed up with the lock, right? And so this is a problem with like these foundational problems that never get fixed. They stole, these attacks, I should say, are usually short-lived. There's groups like Nanog and BGP Stream that are publishing and noticing these things, and someone will contact Route 53 and say, this doesn't look right. Like, maybe you want to fix that. But it takes a few hours, typically, to get this stuff noticed and fixed. In 2 hours, they stole $17 million in Ether, right? So if you can compromise something within an hour or two and get away with your heist, this is a perfectly fine attack. There's other things that are still broken, right? Like DNS. People take over DNS all the time. People DDoS DNS servers to take things down. We have DNSSEC, but that's also not really ever implemented. DNS over HTTP is really a privacy thing for end users. It doesn't really solve the DNS problems. So, I saw this stat the other day that, so the average DNS attack against a financial services company cost them 1.1 million, in this case it was pounds. But, these problems have been around forever, right? And it doesn't seem like there's any motivation to fix them. So, clearly this is part of our dumpster fire. And I think, certificate authorities is kind of the same thing with typo squatting. Anyone can get a Let's Encrypt. Everyone sort of like wants to bypass all the UI warnings. For most users, a certificate attack is going to mess them up. And of course, we have developers not implementing certificate validation properly too, right? Like in all those mobile apps. I think when we last looked at this, like 70% of mobile apps don't validate that certificates are valid. So you can just, man in the middle their TLS connections with, self-signed certificates, and that it just thinks that's fine, right? The other thing that I see is a problem is security vendors. Of course, not all the security vendors out there are my company. But, in general, security vendors like to say, we make you secure, right? Like every firewall vendor on the planet is like, you need to secure your network. I put in the firewall, now my network is secure. That language to the average person is just completely wrong. It didn't secure the network. It does some stuff. There's some level of security. Maybe you can say it's a little more secure. Buy our product, it makes your network a little more secure. It's not that exciting to the marketing folks, but that's the truth, right? Oracle's unbreakable? I don't think so, right? So the marketing people like to use these superlatives, but superlatives are misleading, and they lead people to think that they're secure. Like, I got my firewall, the company said it makes my network secure. I got my endpoint security, the company said it makes my endpoint secure. And my files got breached. What happened? Then we blame the user for doing something stupid, right? Oh, it's user's fault. User screwed up. They didn't do something right. that's sort of the dumpster fire we have with the way we talk about security to people buying security technology or services. I don't know what the solution to that one is, but it's just an ongoing problem that we never seem to be dealing with. The other problem I see all the time is people think everything is secure by default. What? No, it's insecure by default. Like the first time I saw remember, they don't really do this that much anymore, but remember when you first installed Windows NT somewhere and it had lockdown instructions, right? It's wide open and then you have to do all these different things. I remember one of the first NSA guides to locking down NT4. It was 353 pages. No one is going to do this. No one is going to do this, so it's inherently insecure because you shipped it wide open, right? So I think that it's the same thing we see with IoT devices, with any kind of software people install. It's the same thing with privacy. I'm not going to talk about privacy today, but it's the same thing. Oh, you signed up for an account. You're completely exposed. It's not private at all. Oh, do all these steps to make it private. That's bullshit, right? That's just crap, right? And that's what we live with. And the thing that I deal with a lot is developers. And developers think they're writing secure code by default, right? They're like, I've been doing this for 20 years. I write high-quality code. It's performant code. It does the functionality. It's done on time. I'm a good developer. They think because of all those things, it's also secure. Talk to a developer. That's what they really think. They don't think they need to do anything else to make their product secure. But we all know, security is a completely separate domain than quality and performance, right? Functional quality and performance. Back in 2002, I went to Java 1 with At Stake, and we actually had a booth there because we were working on a tool, and we had a service that we would sell to people writing Java applications, and we told them, we can help you make sure that your Java application is secure. You work at a financial services company, you're making an online banking portal or whatever, hire us, we have tools, and we'll make your application secure. And the developers basically came up and they were chuckling and laughing, who are these goofy dudes? What are they talking about? I know Java is secure. That's why we chose to write in Java. It's secure. Right, because that was the marketing for Java, right? Sun marketed Java as a secure alternative to C and C++, which was the languages people were using before that. And because it was a secure language, not more secure, or eliminate some security vulnerabilities, which no one wants to say that. They said Java was secure. So all the developers thought Java was secure. And that's why we had a decade of really crappy web apps before people started to say, oh, maybe I should have some security process here before I put my application into production. And it was just such a mind change for them. We actually showed them, this is how SQL injection works. And they were just in complete disbelief because their mind was already set that they chose Java because Java was secure. So now I'll pick on the vendors a little bit. I don't know, has anyone heard the saying, the cobbler's children have no shoes? And the idea is, the cobbler is so busy, working, dusk to dawn to put food on the table, and just barely scraping by making shoes, that he doesn't have time to make shoes for his own children. So his own children don't have shoes because he's focused on making money, right? He's got to support his family. Well, guess what? Security vendors are exactly the same. They're trying to make their products as quickly as possible and get them to market, and having extra security processes or having to hire security people to help them actually secure their own stuff costs money and time. And I have the data to show that actually security vendors have the most insecure software. So this is applications we looked at a few years ago, and the orange bar here is whether it failed our testing, which is if it had a critical or high vulnerabilities when we did testing. And you can see the financial services apps are actually pretty good. Only 37% failed out of all the ones we did. I was like, they're doing actually pretty good. The financial services people are thinking, hey, if our app gets breached and our customers lose a lot of money in some transaction or something, we're gonna lose business, right? Like it was a business requirement, a business imperative for the financial services software makers to do that. Maybe PCI and PADSS had something to do with that, but there's also other non-regulated software that are doing better. Even learning and growth and customer support are doing better than security products. 74% failed, right? How does that make you feel? The security companies are the ones who care the least about making secure software. It's completely ridiculous, right? But it's there in the data in our testing. And let me tell you, there's another data point here. Just don't listen to me. Mudge tweeted this last year. He says the percentage of security software, 3.8% in DoD and US government. So 3.8% of the software that's deployed at the DoD and the US government is security software. It makes up 28% of the security vulnerabilities that they find on their network. More than a quarter of the vulnerabilities are coming from less than 4% of software, right? So think of all the work that people are doing to maintain and configure and patch all their security solutions, right? Because the security vendors don't make secure software. It's pretty crazy. I think that qualifies as dumpster fire. We should have had like drink if you say that, right? So where are we going, right? So I saw this op-ed in the New York Times, and it was by the general counsel of the NSA. And he basically said, you know, technology is changing so fast, we just can't keep up with it. And that is definitely a huge factor that I see out there why we're in the state of insecurity. If we just sort of stopped, no new protocols, you know, no new IoT products, and like we took a breath for a year and just sort of made sure everything was secure and got down our security debt, and then, you know, worked from there, we'd probably be okay. But that's never going to happen, right? We're never going to do that. So we're going to be constantly churning in this state of there's new protocols, there's new ways of deploying software, there's new languages. People are doing new things with software like blockchain and AI that we don't even know how to secure, and people are putting all this money out there and all this risk. So that's going to continue. So I totally agree. And I also agree with, you know, sort of the threat space is going to be, you know, all pervasive. So that sounds like we're going to be in a world of hurt for the future. The other thing I see out there is, you know, Mark Andreessen famously said, software is eating infrastructure. I'm sorry, software is eating the world. And so you could look at that as what are the different places software is eating, and one of the things is infrastructure, right? That's the cloud, right? Where everything is becoming software defined. And that's one of the things that's giving us this unprecedented speed in deploying applications, is that we can just spin up all these machines without plugging anything in or screwing things into racks. And we can just build stuff with off-the-shelf components, whether they're services from your cloud provider or they're open source things. Speed is the name of the game. And then the whole DevOps movement is really encapsulating the concept of, you know, operations now is just software, right? And developers can do their own ops. The next phase I see of this is DevSecOps, which is developers are going to be able to do, you know, their own security. And security shifts from, you know, securing physical networks to securing all that software-defined stuff and applications. So we're also in a period of having to change how we do security. And you know, I think software is starting to eat security, right? We're starting to see developers do security without security experts. Which is really the only way to do it because, you know, we're outnumbered like 100 to 1, right? We can't be everywhere. There's a developer writing code and making mistakes constantly. We just can't do that. So we need automated systems that developers can use. The flip side of that is security people are, and I'm not talking about product vendors making software that you deploy or appliances running software. Security people in enterprises, in the cloud, security people actually writing code to be security engineers, to have someone whose full-time job is security, and the way that they solve security problems in their organization is to write code. This is kind of something that Dino Daizovi talked about at the Black Hat keynote. It's just one of the things he does at Stripe, is he actually writes software to do his job of making sure the apps that Stripe builds are secure. So that's sort of where we're going. And so now I want to talk a little bit about, how do we deal with this, right? Because it seems pretty bad. Like, is there any solution? Is there any way out? I look on one side of the equation, and we have companies like D-Link, which don't really try to secure their routers, right? They don't patch them when they know that there's vulnerabilities, and they recently, end-of-lifed a few routers that have a CVSS 10 score vulnerability in them, and they're not going to fix it because that router's end-of-lifed. Well, guess what? They're still selling it, right? You can go buy a brand new one, right? You can go buy a brand new one. They're not pulling them from the shelves. It's a forever vulnerable router that they're still selling today, and there's no regulation over this, right? There was this FTC consent decree over D-Link that came out last year. That's what this headline is here, but that was actually not for this. It was just that they weren't patching things that they knew about. Was really what it was, and said they were. Of course, the router's secure. I'm sure it's all over the marketing, right? It's totally secure. And then we have the leaky bucket problem, which is sort of the S3 bucket that developers are using, and there's no security process at all, right? They're just doing whatever they want with S3 buckets, and there's no policies, there's no review, there's nothing, and this is how we end up with 15 million people in Ecuador having their PII exposed on the internet, right? We have these catastrophic failures, the same thing with Elasticsearch. There's all kinds of things that developers are like, this is cool, this is really powerful stuff. I can just spin up all this stuff, throw all this data in there, and it's great and get my job done. And there's no security process or controls. So, that's sort of one potential future that could just keep going, right? We could have insecure cloud technology, we could have insecure IoT devices. But on the other hand, this is where security is unevenly distributed. There are people and organizations that are actually making secure software. Like I look at iOS and Windows 10 and Chrome, right? If you look at how many billions of people are using this technology and how it's not a constant shit show, right? It's not like, Windows 10 is not like, Windows XP was. It's just not. It's not bad. We don't have like a global worm problem. They've actually got their act together. And so like, how can we do more of that and distribute what they're doing and less of what, D-Link and what everyone is doing with their S3 buckets? How do we distribute the security more widely? So, there's a saying, and this is something, I had heard the saying and I did some research. It's actually something that JFK said when he was talking about his economic policy. He said, I want an economic policy that's like a rising tide that will lift all boats, right? My economic policy isn't going to make the overall, GDP go up, because that could just, make all the rich companies be more productive and all the rich people make more money, and the middle class and the poor stay exactly where they are. He wanted an economic policy that would lift all the boats like the tide does, whether you're a big boat or you're a small boat. And so I got thinking, like, we should think about security that way, right? We shouldn't just be saying, like, well, let's have big bug bounties for, Windows 10, and all the security talent out there is going after making Windows 10 incrementally more secure, right? We could do that, and there would be some benefit to that. But then, someone's just going to spin up a leaky bucket, or they're going to just plug in some IoT device, and it's not going to matter that, Windows 10 went from, a vulnerability density of, 1 vulnerability per million lines of code to 1 for every 2 million lines of code, right? That won't make a difference when you can just plug in something that has no security done to it, and your data is owned, right? So I think we need to, people have talked about sort of getting people above the security poverty line. I think we need to think about things that can do that. So this would be a better, this is nicer, right? We can all drive our boats. So I think we should think about things that can be applied broadly, not to just the security leaders. That's easiest for the sort of the people that are at the bottom to apply. And I already talked about we're going to help the people that are below the security poverty line. So let's look at where security is unevenly distributed and think about what are the security leaders doing? Like what are the things that they're doing? And so one thing that they do is they assume the network is compromised, right? They security leaders like Google use a zero trust network. They famously came out with their Beyond Corp network architecture, and they published it. Like anyone can do this, and there's actually tools out there that are almost like consumer grade that you can build a zero trust network. And I think that's the direction that we need to go in. And we can look at what Google did. They did this in response to the Aurora attacks. The fact that their Chinese branch office was trusted just because of its location on the network. They said, hey, we can't do this. We're a global company. We can't have every network node be trusted in some way. We need to go to a zero trust model. And I think every company should probably go to a zero trust model with their network. If they're building out software in the cloud, go with the zero trust model. The second thing I think leaders do is they build security in from the very beginning, right? When they start, we're going to build this system, they start thinking about security early, right? Whether it's a piece of software, whether it's some infrastructure they're doing, and they don't think about security later, right? This is really hard for startups to do, but at some point they have to start thinking this way. They have to start doing this, because otherwise you don't build security in until you have that huge breach and that FTC consent decree, like which happened to Twitter, it happened to Snapchat, because they didn't do any security until they were 5-6 years in as a company and had tens of millions of users, and it actually cost them more money to do security later. So building security in is critical, and that's what all the security leaders do. You wouldn't get iOS, Chrome, or the security of Windows 10 unless it was built in from the very early stage of the development process. And the other thing security leaders do is they expect their suppliers to do this too. And they ask their suppliers. They don't say, oh, you have a big brand name, I'm sure you wrote secure software. They don't think it's secure by default. They say, prove it to me. Prove to me. If you want me to buy your software or use your service to run my company, you have to prove to me that you're doing all the things that I'm doing when I build my own software. Like, I don't want to have extra risk in my organization just because I'm using a supplier, right? So that's another thing that security leaders do. If you've ever tried to sell anything to Apple, IBM, Microsoft, or Google, you would know that. They scrutinize you. The other thing is they leverage the work of others, right? So if someone is doing something secure, they use that, right? They use something that's been open sourced, that they know is secure, that some other group has put out. Microsoft is actually going to be switching over to Chrome as their built-in Windows 10 browser, because they said, hey, you know what? Chrome is actually doing a better job than we're doing, and we're just going to go that way. The other thing I think is important is operate less software, because software is hard to operate securely. First of all, it ships insecurely, so you have to do all that extra patching to make it extra configuration. You have to do the lockdown guide, and then you have to maintain its patch level, right? Like, why would you want to do that when you could do SaaS and make the person who's writing the software configure it securely and keep it patched, right? And put all the onus on the SaaS providers instead of receiving software and letting that software vendor shift all their liability to you, right? It's your fault. You didn't follow the lockdown guide. We had the patch out there. You didn't patch it in time, right? When you operate software, the system we have, I know it's not that great, right? Where the vendors disclaim all liability, right? So you are liable if you operate the software. If you use a SaaS provider, that SaaS provider needs to operate that software securely. They need to keep it patched. But all SaaS providers aren't the same. You know, you want to hold them accountable, right? You want to look for their architecture. You know, DI stands for distributed, immutable, and ephemeral. Like, if they're using the cloud, are they using that kind of architecture? What is their crypto? Are they doing good key management? You know, what algorithms are they using? These are things that you have to ask a SaaS provider. Don't assume the SaaS provider is secure. But I don't think that the market can solve, you know, all problems. A lot of stuff I'm talking about is like organizations making good decisions with where they're going to put their money. I think that there's some problems that really just can't be solved, like the insecure IoT device, because those become sort of environmental problems, where like the Mirai botnet was able to DDoS DNS servers in lots of places. And so a lot of insecure IoT devices become an environmental problem because it allows attackers to leverage this computing power to launch attacks and DDoS anywhere on the network. So it sorts to become something like, you know, pollution. Like, each individual person, you know, polluting might not be bad, but everyone polluting makes it so that people get asthma, right? So we need to have some minimum standards around there. I think the UK, with their Secure by Design initiative for IoT, is heading in the right direction. So very basic stuff that you're like, oh my God, someone is actually shipping products that aren't doing these things, and they are, and that's why it has to be there. So these minimum standards, like no hard-coded passwords, right, in an IoT device. Again, that's not secure by default. You know, the device needs to be securely updatable. Yes, people ship devices that you can't update securely, like no signed updates, right? And the third one is that they have to have a response capability, a vendor response capability. If someone finds a vulnerability, they actually have a process where they take in that vulnerability and update their software and update their device. I don't think it's a lot to ask, but it's crazy that we live in a world that people are shipping stuff that doesn't even have those minimums that we have to do that. So I think we do need some government standards around minimums, or at least labeling whether you meet the standard or not. Like, does it meet the minimum standard or not? Maybe you can still sell the product, but you know, it's like cigarettes. It's like, if you use this product, your data is eventually going to get stolen. Like a picture of your data flying away or something on the box. Because we need transparency to understand, you know, what's a good product and what's a bad product. Because right now we just don't, and so that means that the market can't decide, and there's no incentive for the small people, the small vendors, to put in security. So I talked about the forever vulnerable routers still for sale, and I said, well, what's the solution to that? Well, there should be an expiry date, like milk, on a piece of hardware that you buy, right? If you're buying a TV, a smart TV, and it's going to be end of life after 4 years, where they're not going to ship patches anymore, shouldn't that be something that you know about at time of purchase, and it's clearly available to the consumer? And I think if we start seeing end-of-life dates on software and hardware, people would at least know that they need to upgrade. Like maybe the D-Link router was only $100 and you had it for 6 years, and upgrading to another one for $100. Maybe it's not a big deal, but the thing is people don't even know. They don't even know that their hardware needs to be decommissioned and they need to buy something new. They don't even know. So this is where transparency can make a big difference. And then this is, I think, I'm talking to the audience here of you. What can you do, right? What can security people do to talk to business leaders? And we need to communicate some of the things I talked about. We need to communicate that we can't trust internet infrastructure. If we're building something securely that's operating over the internet, we have to put in extra stuff to make sure that we are mitigating the fact that BGP is never going to get fixed. DNS is never going to get fixed. Certificates are always going to be a problem. That would maybe say, hey, maybe we should be pinning our certificates in our mobile app, or at least be checking for certificate validity. If people don't know these things, how are they going to do it? So we still have to constantly be educating. The other one I think is really around security products, where people think if I just get all the right security products, that I check all the boxes, that I'll be secure. And we all know that's not true, but there are still CISOs out there that don't think this, and especially organizations that don't have CISOs, right? They have just a CIO or a head of IT, and they think that if they get the right few security products, right set of security products, they'll be secure. We have to make sure people know that's not true. And lastly, I think this is really one of the most important things is, technology is not secure by default. It takes work. And don't ship me a lockdown guide. Actually make your stuff secure. And think of this as, a supply chain problem where whenever you're buying something, you're inheriting risk unless you do your due diligence, and because there's no regulations here. Like when you buy a house, it passed the inspection, right? It was built to the building code, and it passed the inspection. So you don't have to do much due diligence about the safety of the house, right? When you buy it, like the banister isn't just going to fall off, right? Someone checked that. If there's supposed to be a fire door between the garage and the house, it's there, right? Because someone checked that. With technology, there's no building code, there's no inspector. It's up to you to do that. And I think that most business leaders don't understand this. They don't think this way. They think that there's a big brand there, so of course they did it securely. We all know from the data that if it's a security product, it doesn't matter how big the brand name is. So I think that's probably the most important thing that we need to get across to people that have the checkbook and are buying things, that you're inheriting a huge amount of risk unless you do your due diligence and push back on your vendors. So I think I'm about out of time. I don't know if we have time for a couple questions or not. What do you think? Yeah. So if anyone has a question, I'd be happy to try this. Someone in the back there? Yeah, so I think, I like the idea of FedRAMP. I don't like the idea that it's like super complicated and no one can get FedRAMPed, right? I can tell you that Veracode has been trying to get FedRAMPed for like 3 years now. It's just a complete, I don't know, dumpster fire. So, drink. So I like the concept of FedRAMP. I just think that the whole thing is really broken. The amount of paperwork and consultants and all this stuff I like the concept of it, where the federal government is saying, hey, if I'm going to buy your SaaS solution, your cloud solution, I need to do my due diligence and make sure you did yours. But we need lower tiers that are simpler to meet. SOC 2 is better. It's not as bad as FedRAMP. And that's definitely something that I would look to my SaaS providers to say, especially if I had, my customer data or my employees' data at that SaaS provider, I'd want to make sure that they were SOC 2 compliant. Yep.
Still the same issue we always have. People in this whole issue. You can perfect technology out there, and technology you get the right way. You're not solving the people issue. People haven't changed.
I still think it can be solved with technology, right? You can force people to use two-factor, and if you look at all the ways two-factor bypass, people hijacking SMS and stuff like that, those are all technical attacks. I think the people problems can all be solved. We're just not willing to do it, and people aren't willing to do something which it takes a little bit more time. How much longer does it take to log in with your with your Duo or whatever? I don't know, 5 seconds? Right, come on, right? So, yeah, the anxiety. Yeah, that's what I liked about Duo. They made it 60 seconds instead of whatever it was with RSA security. So I don't buy it. I think that we can solve the people problems. Want to do it?
Well, any friction is an obstacle. Any friction.
People won't do it. That's the problem. You have to take it away from the person. They don't have a choice.
I agree. Fallbacks to insecure protocols, fallback to, once you have two-factor in place, falling back to one-factor is insecure, right? And I think that it's very clear to people that we're shipping it secure, you're turning the knob to insecure. And then thinking about it that way, they've decided to take on risk, okay? What we do is we don't do it that way. We say, my technology is secure. My system is secure. Use it. Oh, there's this lockdown guide that allows you to do two-factor. That's really what I'm talking about. It's flip it around. So I guess we're pretty much out of time. Thank you so much.